Welcome to Drowning in Liability, Reducing Climate Change Impacts Through Municipal Planning and Zoning, part of the online module series entitled Providing Resilience Education for Planning in Rhode Island, or PREP-RI. PREP-RI is a partnership of Rhode Island Sea Grant, the University of Rhode Island, and the Narragansett Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. Thanks to the Rhode Island Division of Statewide Planning for their support in funding this update to the 2017 module that was promoted by the Rhode Island General Assembly and state government. My name is Andy Teitz, and I'm a partner with the law firm of Ursula Teitz & Rich Limited. I've been a municipal solicitor for many years, and I've also represented private clients before many cities and towns, courts, and state agencies. I am also a planner certified by the American Institute of Certified Planners. By the end of this module, you will be able to identify planning and zoning interests for local flooding, define actions you can do as a decision maker to reduce liability related to planning and zoning decisions, and identify resources for further information. So why does this even matter? It matters because people and places are at increased risk. For example, there's more frequent sunny day flooding from the rising sea levels, as depicted on this photo. And people are at increased risk from more intense storms. Flooding and other climate change impacts have cascading effects. These impacts negatively affect properties, municipal infrastructure, and the health and safety of residents and emergency responders. They also affect our local economies and natural resources, both of which are tied to tourism and tax revenue. Municipal board members make decisions that impact what a community will look like for generations to come. You wear multiple hats. You're a visionary when you're doing long-term planning. You're a legislator when creating regulations. And you're a decision maker when approving or denying applications that come before you. Good planning and regulatory practices will become even more critical as conditions continue to change. So what exactly is happening? Sea level rise is increasing and accelerating. We've already experienced almost a foot of sea level rise since 1930. Sea level rise is negatively affecting both public and private property. In Rhode Island, we can likely expect an additional 3 feet of sea level rise by 2050 and over 9 feet by 2100 at the end of the century. And it's not just the coast. There's been an increase in both average annual precipitation and heavy rain events. Warmer air temperatures allow the atmosphere to hold more water vapor. Since 1930, annual precipitation has increased by a dramatic 9.5 inches in New England. And in the Northeast, heavy rain events have increased by 60% between 1958 and 2016. These are defined as the top 1% of all daily events within a certain time period. A good benchmark for a heavy rain event is a month's worth of rain for a given location falling in one day. In other words, a big event. So what can you do as a board member? First, remember that resilience is not the frosting on the cake. It's baked in. It's important for municipal officials to work together to ensure that local plans, policies, and standards support resilience. Take proactive steps to minimize your municipality's liability exposure by ensuring that your comprehensive plan, hazard mitigation plan, and other plans and policies are built on science-based information. And be transparent. Make sure your municipality's standards are very clear to developers and other applicants. Consider climate impacts on infrastructure and reduce liability by incorporating projected impacts and strategies in your capital improvement plan and other plans and policies. As seen here, the design of this pedestrian bridge incorporated 3 feet of sea level rise. bioswales, and other green infrastructure capture and treat stormwater. A simple way to better manage and protect infrastructure is to ensure that the most up-to-date flood hazard areas are identified and include data on future conditions. Keep assets out of harm's way by implementing approaches such as overlay zones and low-impact development. For example, South Kingstown maps sea level rise in its comprehensive plan, and Tiverton decreased impacts to important natural areas through low-impact development. Research from the Association of State Floodplain Managers shows that when communities use these approaches to avoid adverse impacts to the property and rights of others, which is referred to as a no adverse impact strategy, they can decrease the potential for successful liability suits against them. Also, be sure to explicitly state the flood risk findings in your zoning and land use decisions. Other tools include transfer of development rights, voluntary buyout programs, and managed retreat. Transfer of development rights directs development away from environmentally sensitive sending areas into receiving areas that have less flood risk. Voluntary buyout programs, often funded in part by federal monies, involve removing houses and other structures from all flood zones to restore the land's natural functions and values while protecting property owners from harm. Managed retreat is similar to buyout programs but at a larger scale. It's essentially the strategic relocation of development community-wide to manage risk. This is very similar to TDR, for which there already is state enabling legislation. Courts have broadly supported restrictive regulations based on public safety, nuisance prevention, public trust, and other concerns. Examples include the condemnation of unsafe buildings, removal of trees infected with a pathogen, or restricting access to a dangerous area, such as land in the path of a potentially life-threatening flood. You want to avoid something called illegal taking, which requires compensation by your municipality. There are two types of takings, physical and regulatory. In a physical taking, the government exercises the right of eminent domain to occupy private property for public use, such as to build or widen a road. A physical taking almost always requires the government to pay the owner. A regulatory taking is when the government denies a private property owner all use of their property. This concept was first enunciated by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1922 in the case of Pennsylvania Coal Company versus Mahan. The court held that whether a regulatory act constitutes a taking requiring compensation depends on the extent of diminution in the value of property. If a taking went too far, then it required compensation. This has developed into the concept that a regulatory taking has to take all or almost all of the value of a property before it becomes compensable. But note that this is only one factor in determining whether a taking has occurred. There must be an essential nexus between a legitimate state interest and the permit condition which results in the taking. In Nolan versus California Coastal Commission in 1987, the U.S. Supreme Court reviewed a commission requirement that a lateral public easement be dedicated along Nolan's beachfront as a condition of approval to demolish an existing bungalow and replace it with a 3-bedroom house. The court found both that the nexus was missing and it was a physical taking, so compensation was due to Nolan. As noted earlier, there are ways to avoid total takings, such as by allowing some use of a property. In one of the most famous cases, Penn Central Transportation Company versus New York City, 1978, the Supreme Court denied a takings claim brought by the owner of Grand Central Terminal, following the refusal of New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission to approve plans for the construction of a 50-story office building on top of the terminal. The court found that the law did not interfere with the current use as a railroad terminal or prevent it from realizing a reasonable rate of return on its investment, especially since pre-existing air rights were transferable to other properties in the vicinity, which acted as a form of compensation. The reasonable investment-backed expectation test may be useful in the current liability setting. For example, if someone pays only $25,000 for a waterfront lot, they cannot reasonably expect it to be a buildable home site, given the usually higher priced value of such locations, even when at risk. Also, if someone inherits or buys undeveloped property and does nothing with it for decades, a lack of investment-backed expectation can be deduced. Know when a regulatory taking is a total taking. Other factors that come into play in such an inquiry include the degree of harm to public lands and resources, or adjacent private property posed by the claimant's proposed activities, or the social value of the claimant's activities and their suitability to the locality in question, or the ease with which the alleged harm can be avoided through measures taken by the claimant and the government, or adjacent private landowners even, alike. Be sure to codify something called background principles. A key case is from the U.S. Supreme Court in 1992, Lucas versus South Carolina Coastal Council. The rationale of the court was that South Carolina was not enacting completely new restrictions on coastal development, but instead simply codifying background principles of existing common law. Remember that term, no adverse impact? The concept is the same. Under common law, a landowner cannot create a nuisance by filling in his land in a way that floods his neighbor. Likewise, a state can also prevent that filling or building in a floodplain, for example, if it might reasonably damage the public property or other private property. In the climate liability context, there is an interesting parenthetical phrase in the Lucas case that could be very important. The court stated, "The fact that a particular use has long been engaged in by similarly situated owners ordinarily imports a lack of any common law prohibition. Though changed circumstances or new knowledge may make what was previously permissible no longer so." In other words, you may have many pre-existing houses on a barrier beach and yet prevent expansion or new construction based on the new knowledge, including that provided in this module. Just make sure that your ordinance or your decision cites the specific new evidence. In 1998, the town of Chatham, Massachusetts, on Cape Cod, refused to permit the construction of a new home in a flood zone because the local zoning bylaw prohibited new residential units in the town's mapped floodplains. In 2005, this was upheld by Massachusetts' highest court in the Gove case. In a very similar case, the Smith case, the town of Falmouth denied variances to build in a floodplain. The Massachusetts Court of Appeal upheld such a denial and determined that it was not a taking. This case is significant because it was then petitioned to the U.S. Supreme Court for review, which refused to consider it. Chatham and Falmouth prevailed in these cases for several reasons that are applicable to Rhode Island municipalities. First and foremost, the goal of safeguarding people and property was clearly articulated in the bylaw. Additionally, while the construction of new homes was prohibited, there were many alternative uses so that property owners weren't denied all beneficial use of the land. The court also found that the law was fair and applied to an area that was mapped in town regulations. As a council member, you can help draft into your ordinances other permissible, including by special permit, alternate economic uses for a property in a floodplain. As a board member, you can identify those uses in your denial of a permit for a house. In the Chatham case, that included the possibility of a marina, boat storage, or stabling horses. In the Falmouth case, other economic uses for the property included selling it to abutting owners. In both cases, although the value, as is, was significantly less than what it would have been if a house could be built on it, the as-is property still retained more than a token value, and thus the owners had not been denied all beneficial use of their properties. Additionally, local emergency managers were willing to testify that evacuation efforts would put rescue workers at risk. Finally, the town was willing to defend its position in court. The Smith case involved a 2-day trial. Make sure that your municipal leaders and solicitor are committed, not just because of concern with environmental damage, but because of the greater future liability, both financial and physical, that may come from approving a project in an unsuitable location. So here's the bottom line. Use the best available vetted information on flooding and other climate impacts in your decisions, regulations, and plans. Ensure that your ordinances and regulations have clear connection to public health, safety, and welfare. Show a commitment to flood mitigation and resilience planning by making progress toward the goals outlined in the comprehensive plan and the hazard mitigation plan. When making a final decision, be specific in your conditions and in reflecting resilience concerns. Strong rules and regulations will reduce liability, including that related to takings and administrative appeals. And treat similar properties similarly. While decisions will be difficult, they'll lead to more sound and defensible decisions in the long run. Be sure to directly address flood impacts in local policies and regulations. This is often not done fully to address our changing landscapes. Planning and zoning decisions based on flood considerations may be contested if there aren't adequate regulations and findings of fact to support them. Link decisions to cited scientific studies. A generalized statement about public welfare, whether in a zoning ordinance or a denial decision, is not enough. The ordinance should contain citations of scientific studies that document the danger, and the decisions should specifically relate those scientific findings to the particular pieces of land. The word because, with the following explanation, is always needed in any finding of fact. It's not a finding of fact if it doesn't include the word because. So what else can you do? Consult with your municipal solicitor on specific issues before the hearing and decision. Have your municipal solicitor draft or review the decision. This is both allowed and encouraged in Rhode Island. Stay up to date with the latest science and policy. And talk to your peers about successes and lessons learned in other communities. Also, check out resources from organizations such as the RIC Grant Legal Program, the American Planning Association, Flood Mitigation Association, and many others for more information on this topic. Thank you for viewing this module. Go to the PrepRI website to check out additional resources, complete the brief quiz to get your certificate, and view the other modules.